Hello and welcome back to another episode of Battle Chat, where you guys chill out and I talk about BattleCon concepts. In this episode, we're gonna talk about what characters you should use when fighting a beginner player. Now, in the previous episode, we were talking about how to get new people into playing BattleCon. And aside from the initial wall of getting them to actually play the game, the following problem becomes: how do you teach someone how to play BattleCon? Of course, you can always just read the rules, let them read the rules, or tell them the rules, or just say, put a style and a base together and then that's it. But I feel like the player doesn't actually meaningfully learn anything that easily. And of course, there have been many questions. What characters should we use in order to make it so that the player learns a lot even during their first game? In short, it's often a question of which characters are beginner friendly and do I have to go easy on them because they'll lose really easily. Now, I personally think that a good character to start off with would be somebody like Cadenza, who can be used very easily because not only is he simple, he has a lot of stun guard, making it so that he can just brunt through a lot of attacks and still get off the attacks he wants to get off. Because the biggest problem for many beginners is that they usually get stunned really easily because they're not really sure how priority works or how range works or how stunning works for that matter. So there's that. However, I feel like that's still a bit of a problem because giving Cadenza to a newbie might be okay, but I feel like they don't really learn a lot of the intricacies of the game. Sure, they get to play the game, but then they're just playing literally one of the quote-unquote easiest characters to play, and having a crutch like that doesn't really teach you the intricacies or the awesome parts of the game. Now, although Cadenza is very useful, I think the better beginner character would be somebody like Hikaru. Hikaru is a character that does a lot of things. In fact, he does most of the things in BattleCon. He can be fast, he can be high damage, he can be high hit confirm, he can be high defense, he can move around a lot, he can choose to be stationary. In fact, his kit even has a majority of the triggered effects on it, meaning that if the newbie plays Hikaru, the newbie will be able to explore almost every single aspect of the game, instead of just being a reactive juggernaut the entire time. Hikaru's biggest advantage is that he's a brawler. He can be anything, but only really one thing at a time. This one thing at a time makes it less of an information overload and much easier for the player to understand what power plays are, how good power is, how good soak is, how good priority is, and so on and so forth. So that answers that first problem, with Cadenza just being a slow juggernaut and the player not really understanding the real intricacies of BattleCon on their first game. However, that leaves us with this second problem, that you can't go all out against them or else they'll just immediately lose. For this response, I made a character that you can use when fighting against a newbie's Hikaru in order to teach them the entire game on the first try. And it's this simple. I want to introduce all of you to Sensei, or it's spelled SEN-531. because it's leet speak and I wanted it to sound cool. Now, it was a character I made up, and essentially his entire goal was to be a training robot. He's the character that the advanced player will play against the newbie player's Hikaru. Sensei is a very unique character in the sense that his unique ability is essentially a handicap that allows it so that the advanced player can play all out without outright destroying the opponent. It says that Sensei essentially has to pick a card as a style and put it face up on the board, and that will be his style for the rest of the game until the opponent figures out how to activate its trigger. Each of Sensei's styles has an appropriate trigger, and at the end of the beat where the opponent meets the trigger that's on your card, you immediately put that card out of the game, and then you pick a new style to be your style for the rest of the game again. This repeats until you run out of styles, because the moment that you do, Sensei's unique ability kills him. This means that the Sensei player essentially has a clock. The opponent will be able to see what your style is, meaning that they have a distinct advantage over you as your possible attack spectrum goes from 15 possible attacks to literally 4 possible attacks. And it also means that it gives them distinct goals as to what they should do. Every single one of the styles that Sensei has is called a lesson. It teaches a specific aspect of the game that makes it so that the player playing Hikaru will be able to understand what parts of the game are important and how to value certain stats. These all implicitly teach the player how to play BattleCon, because not only are they playing the character who is able to do almost everything in the game, they're fighting against a character who tells you, hey, you need to do this specific thing in order to beat me. So with that in mind, let's go over the lessons that Sensei will teach new players. Let's start off with style number 1. Lesson Priority. Lesson Priority gives Sensei priority +1, and its trigger is that the opponent wins the priority check. This essentially means that Sensei gets to play a fast attack almost every turn, but the opponent then knows that they have to play an attack that's even faster than Sensei's possible attacks. And of course, this doesn't really teach anything else, but winning priority ties is one of the biggest and most important things about playing BattleCon. And this lesson alone teaches the newbie player that it's very important. As an added bonus, since the player is playing Hikaru, he can easily anti-win to almost always outspeed Sensei's cards. So that's very important to consider as well. Next up is Lesson Stunning. Magical Stun Guard 3 is very important in this game. In fact, most people will realize that Stun Guard 3 is enough to brunt through most attacks. This means that the Hikaru player has to anti either his fire token or play a stat that has positive power. Either way, this is usually the only way Hikaru will be able to bust through this solid defense, and that's very good because not only is it a decent style, giving you magical stun guard on everything, meaning that the Sensei player is essentially playing a half-decent style, Hikaru is then given the distinct goal that they have to realize that Stun Guard is an important stat in this game. Next up is Lesson Stun Guard. Lesson Stun Guard gives Sensei power -1 and priority +4. Its trigger is that a reactive opponent hits you. This means that Sensei will repeatedly have a really fast attack, and if the opponent somehow finds a way to be faster, they won't get rid of Sensei's style. So it really means that they have to learn how to use Stun Guard in order to get through this lesson. And that's very important because, as we learned in Lesson Stunning, priority isn't everything. However, the newbie has to understand how that works as well. And using Stun Guard is very easy because of the power -1, shot, strike, and any single anti of the Earth token are more than enough to brunt through any attack that Sensei has. Of course, the Sensei player can mix it up by playing a strike, making it so that shot doesn't work, but then again, that's all part of the balancing here because Sensei has a decent chance of winning the game either way. Next up is Lesson Clashing. Lesson Clashing is a card that instantly makes you and the opponent clash, and its trigger is that the opponent wins the clash. So clashing is a mechanic that doesn't usually happen every game, but in the games where it does happen, it can usually decide the match. Aside from that, most advanced strategies revolve around purposely clashing the opponent, so you'll see clashes more often as the people get better. Sure, the newbie might not need this exactly, but clashing is a central mechanic to the game. And they have to understand how it works, and explaining it to them in words is really hard, so it's just easier to just make them clash. Not a lot of characters can do this by default, so I just gave this to Sensei. It's very good, it's very easy, and usually the lesson clashing is finished within 1 beat. So the opponent just has to understand how priority works, so I really recommend playing Lesson Clashing after Lesson Priority, but aside from that, it's good enough. It's a very decent style and it teaches the newbie how clashing works. Besides, if Hikaru did anti his win token, it's usually more than enough to make sure that they win the clash. Next up is Lesson Dodging. Lesson Dodging has range +1, power +1, and priority +1. This is actually Sensei's most powerful style and is the most deadly of the bunch. And I think this is the culminating style because dodging is a very important mechanic in BattleCon and arguably the most important thing you have to understand. Hit confirm is God in BattleCon. If you want to praise anything, it's hit confirm. And hit confirm is actually a really complex concept because not only does it talk about range, it also talks about movement, priority, and damage. So with that in mind, you have to understand that making this style really good is important because the opponent, the newbie player, has to understand that Sensei's style is really good. So they have to find a way to not get wrecked by it. And so the trigger on Lesson Dodging is that Sensei doesn't hit the opponent. This means that it's Sensei's job to make sure that this attack hits, and this is usually how Sensei will win the game, by repeatedly making this attack hit. However, this attack has a very distinct weakness, which is range +1. Lesson dodging is going to be a really hard style to beat if you don't understand how drives and bursts work. Drive and burst are the central movement cards of this game, and understanding how both of those cards work is really important to beating this lesson, and arguably really important for being halfway decent good at BattleCon. So this lesson is actually really easily beaten by just playing a burst or a drive at range 1. It's really that simple. It's a very good card to teach the newbie one of the biggest and most important concepts of BattleCon, is that hit confirm is the most important thing. And so with that in mind, Sensei has a lot of lessons for the newbie player, and I think is a very good tutorial character. And I do believe that playing him against a newbie who's playing Hikaru is a really fun way to teach BattleCon to someone, because what better way to teach a game to a player than to just let them play? But then again, that's just my opinion, and that's just me having a little battle chat. If you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, do put them in the comments section down below. I'd love to read them. If you guys have your own opinions, maybe you think that Sensei is a badly designed character, maybe you find that other characters are easier to use, well, do put those in the comment section down below, because I'm sure everybody else would love to read that as well. If you guys have any topics you want to suggest or any topics you want me to talk about, do put them in the comment section down below, because they will become the topic for a future video. Without much else to say, thanks for watching, and good night.